Hello there, I'm Catherine Nicholson. Thanks very much for tuning in to Talking Europe on France 24. Now, my guest in today's programme is someone who took on a big job at a difficult time. The former head of medicine regulation at the World Health Organization, Emer Cooke, who was appointed executive director of the European Medicines Agency in November of 2020. Well, since that date, the EMA, as it's known, has brought hope to millions by approving 3 Covid-19 vaccines for use in the European Union, and more are being studied. But the agency has also faced challenges, claims that it's been slow to approve those Covid-19 jabs, and a cyber attack at the end of 2020, to name just 2. Well, let's speak to Emer Cooke about the agency's work and those much scrutinised Covid-19 vaccines. Thank you very much for being with us there in Amsterdam.
Thank you, and it's indeed a pleasure to be here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
I'd like to start off, Emer, by talking about the latest of the 3 vaccines that the EMA has approved for the European Union. The one developed by Oxford University scientists with AstraZeneca. Now, the EMA has approved this for use by all adults, but there have been questions raised about recommending it for over 65s. France, Germany, Italy, Sweden and the Netherlands among the countries that are not recommending it for that older age group. So basically, does it work in over 65s?
We have a large database of adults, including adults over 55, that have been looked at, that have been examined in the context of the clinical trials. The efficacy estimates in the over 55 were not conclusive. And that's the reason why there are some doubts on this at the moment. But we've looked at the immunogenicity issue across different age groups and the safety issues, because the safety profiles were looked at adults over 65. And we don't see a reason to say that it should be not recommended for adults over 65.
One study that hasn't yet been peer-reviewed suggests that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine does reduce transmission by 76%. When might we be able to say whether this is actually the case, that this transmission is dramatically reduced by the vaccine?
That's the answer we would all like to have. And it's not just with respect to the AstraZeneca vaccine, it's with respect to the other vaccines as well. Because the studies are about the prevention of disease. They're not about prevention of disease transmission. So this is something that has to be studied and looked at in real life once we get the products onto the market. And that's, again, not just for the AstraZeneca vaccine, but for the other 2 vaccines that we have authorized as well.
OK, another question coming up at the moment about how far apart the 2 doses of any given vaccine should be given. There have been suggestions from some medical quarters that waiting longer for the second dose actually makes the vaccine more efficient. This would be a big difference, of course, to vaccine decision-making around Europe. Would you agree with that finding, that actually waiting longer makes it more efficient?
Well, I think we have to go back to what the role of the European Medicines Agency is. And our job is to look at the data that has been generated in randomized clinical trials to determine what that data shows. And so we look at it in the context of what we can be sure about with respect to the data that's actually in the files. Now, of course, there's new data emerging all the time, but it can be on lower numbers of population groups. So we feel that it's our job to focus on the data that's there, the recommendations that have been studied in the clinical trials. So, for example, for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, that was a 21-day interval between doses. For the Moderna vaccine, it was a 28-day interval, and for AstraZeneca, we're saying between 4 and 12 weeks, because that's what the data we have shows.
The EMA approved vaccines, all of them, of course, developed and trialled throughout the year 2020 before the emergence of some new variants that are really troubling a lot of people. For example, the UK variant, as it's known, B117, much more transmissible. It's the dominant variant in some places. To what extent, Emer Cooke, can we assume that the 3 vaccines that the EMA has already approved will work against these new mutations?
So, of course, we're monitoring very carefully all the new information on the mutations developing. We work closely with the ECDC in Europe, with the European Commission, and with regulators and healthcare bodies across the world. So we're constantly looking at what the impact of any of our scientific opinions would have in the light of a changing epidemiological situation. And one of the things that we have asked the vaccines developers to look at is the efficacy of their vaccines against the new mutants. Those preliminary studies are ongoing. We're hoping that within the next week or so, we'll actually have a clear plan for any vaccine developer to determine what studies they need to do to show that conclusively. But so far, we've asked them to do some in vitro studies, and they look quite promising, at least against the UK variant.
Just a quick word about the approach to authorising vaccines. The head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has rejected criticism about the European Union's approach of waiting for full approval from the EMA before authorising various vaccines. She said the EU didn't want to compromise on safety and efficacy. Now, people in the UK, I think that she's talking about them because they got their vaccinations earlier because the UK government used an emergency authorisation that the EMA, I know, can't give. In your view, did the UK compromise on safety by giving an emergency authorisation?
It's not for us to comment on what the UK, on the measures that the UK have taken. They had that opportunity available to them at a national level. We have discussed at multiple occasions what the right option for Europe was as a whole, and the option for Europe was that we would go with a conditional marketing authorization. So that's actually the profile of the authorization that is most adapted to emergency situation that is available at European level, which means then that whatever we do is actually valid in all of the 27 member states.
Okay, I'd just like to zone in a bit more on the actual process of how the European Medicines Agency authorises these brand new vaccines. A lot of people we know anecdotally are concerned that the process has been too fast. Can you just tell us how it is that these vaccines got developed so much more quickly than normal? Were parts of the process skipped at all?
Well, absolutely not. No, in fact, the processes that have been followed are the standard processes for any vaccine. I think that the important thing to remember is that there was an enormous amount of multi-stakeholder engagement to really mobilize the processes necessary to focus in on the virus, to do the development process, to make sure that manufacturing capacity was available, and we have very, very large data sets. And that's a function of the large amount of transmission of the disease. So that's a reason why we can be confident in the data that we have, because in fact, for the 2 first vaccines, we're talking about data sets of about 30,000, 40,000 subjects. And that's a very big data set, which gives you a very good understanding of the efficacy and safety in the populations.
There was a cyber attack I mentioned on the EMA's systems before Christmas 2020. And now I know the EMA says that they believe the hackers intended to manipulate stolen data about vaccines and spread that online to reduce trust. Can you just tell us a bit more about how you came to that conclusion?
We discovered this cyber attack in early December, and of course, immediately took all the measures to make sure that the way that the perpetrators has got in was closed off. So that was done very, very quickly. But what we saw was there was a strong focus on COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics in terms of what the cyber attack was seemed to be looking for. And this is all allegations at the moment because this is a criminal investigation that's ongoing. But then we saw in early January, we saw that some of the documents that had been accessed were leaked onto the internet, and they had headings that we haven't put in that seem to be designed to promote, to question processes, to question the whole concept about vaccine effectiveness.
So I'm wondering, what would you personally say to somebody who said, look, I'm just not sure about taking one of these COVID-19 vaccines. I'm a bit suspicious.
I would say if I had the opportunity to take any of these vaccines, I would be delighted to do so. I feel that I see from my own perspective, I see the amount of expert review, the amount of questioning, the amount of really trying to figure out how we got this right that has gone in a really accelerated time frame. And I'm confident that our experts have done a good job.
All right, Emer Cooke, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks to you for watching the programme as well. Hope to see you in part 2.